Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Brenda, and I'm here today to help answer any general or technical questions that you may have. Now, before we get started, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, which is Win Over Tomorrow's Talent. Now, on the slides here, you'll see a quick timing breakdown of our agenda today. Now, these are just rough numbers, so please don't hold us to these. If at any point during today's webinar you have any questions, please don't hesitate to submit those using the Ask a Question tab on the left-hand side of your screen. You can also chat with your fellow attendees by clicking the audience chat that's also on the left side of your screen. We would love to hear where you are joining us from, so please feel free to drop in your state here and let us know how you're doing today. Now, throughout the presentation, we will be utilizing the polling feature. So once those polls are prompted, you will see a pop-up on your screen. You can then select your answer, and you can either close the screen or wait until we remove the poll to continue to view the presentation. You can also download resources if made available by our sponsor today by clicking on the Resources tab. Now, here is a little bit about CMS Wire. We were founded in 2003 and cover the primary topics that you see here on this slide. You can read our great content, register for upcoming conferences and webinars, all by visiting www.cmswire.com. Now, of course, I want to thank today's sponsor, LearnIn, for making today's webinar possible. You can learn more about LearnIn at www.learnin.com, but here's just a quick snippet about them. LearnIn helps companies establish talent academies that steer all the resources needed for building a highly skilled workforce. HR talent and L&D leaders use LearnIn to modernize access to learning budgets and world-class programs, and to simplify the delivery of custom programs to employee groups. LearnIn's core features include a tuition benefits manager, a prepaid learning Stipend card, a world-class program marketplace and custom program builder, and dedicated coaching. Now every employee can build deeper skills precisely aligned to company needs. Okay, so it's time to get into today's content, but I would like to take a few seconds to introduce today's speakers. Today, I am joined by Heather Ostrowski, Organizational Development Specialist at Gate City Bank, and LearnIn's Director of Academy Enablement, Jen Collins. And with that, let's jump right into the content here. Jen, over to you.
Great, thanks, Brenda. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. I am Jen Collins, Director of Academy Enablement at LearnIn. I'm a learning strategist with a passion for talent development and a focus on helping companies design and build really deep skill-building programs to support their business goals. Today, I am joined by my esteemed colleague, Heather Ostrowski. Heather is an organizational development specialist for Gate City Bank. She brings over 20 years of experience supporting humans. While she raises 2 Gen Zers herself, she's fascinated by the research and data and enjoys speaking with companies on how to ignite curiosity and inclusion for our newest workforce. Today, we are going to explore techniques to alleviate the hiring and retention pain points that everyone is feeling. Our webinar is going to focus specifically on appealing to and retaining the 2 generations that already make up more than half of today's workforce, and that's the Gen Z and millennials. We are going to focus on what Gen Z and millennials value and want, and we're going to talk about strategies to hire and retain that young talent and the specifics, ideas for upskilling and to keep your talent talented. So with that, I'll pass it to Heather to kick us off with a poll.
Thank you, Jen, for having me. And thank you, audience, for showing up. We're so excited to just learn from you as well, kicking off with this poll question. So the first question that we're asking is, what best describes your gut reaction to having conversations about generations in the workforce? Is it, again, how many times must we do this? Or tell me more. Or can you generalize individuals into generations? Or wait, who is Gen Z again? Go ahead and select your answer. Okay. Tell me more is winning so far.
So interesting. I love it. Wait, who's Gen Z? Right at 12%. That's wonderful.
And it looks like some of you, you're doing this yet again. How many times? And I know not that long ago, people were really like, oh, millennials, do we really have to talk about millennials again? And so now we have a whole nother generation to add to that, our millennials and Gen Z. So we're happy you've showed up again for the conversation. We'll give you just maybe another minute here to complete the survey. Okay, what do you think? Does that look complete?
It does.
Well, kudos to you that said, tell me more. Of course, we're thrilled that you have shown up curious and interested in learning about our newest workforce. Because really, anytime we show up to learn about people that might be different than us or who might be unique, that is really such a huge win. And of course, when we talk about generations, oftentimes, people tend to get a little bit upset, like, I don't resonate with that at all, or that doesn't make sense to me. And we understand that for sure, because at the end of the day, we're talking about humans and we're all very individual and we show up very uniquely. And then, so the other thing that we always try to then bring in, because again, we're gonna resist it a little bit. So we want to bring in what we call undeniable truths, just evidence that we can all agree on that really kind of lend towards this information of how millennials and Gen Z might show up a little bit uniquely. For example, how we receive information. So if you're like me, Gen Xer, or anyone who was born after 74, it might be true that your information came from, if you were lucky enough to have encyclopedias in your home, somewhere in between channel like 2 and 11 on the TV, a library. Though when I was in college, I used microfiche for research. Okay, if you're not sure what that is, Google it, right, Jen? So that's an undeniable truth that when we looked for information, it took some time, and we certainly didn't sit there with our encyclopedias in our laps and the TV on at the same time. Where we see our younger generations, they really have grown up with this access to information at the palm of their hand. So they get it very quickly. For them, it's being very careful on paying attention to the right channels. For us, we had to listen to our teachers, doctors, parents. We had no choice, and we could not argue them. So that's an example of an undeniable truth that we've really tried to weave in so that we can foster a little bit of a deeper understanding.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And it's a perfect segue into the first section that we want to talk about, which is when we dove into the research and findings, one of the things that we continued to see throughout was that piece of personalization. And because as you pointed out, it wasn't just about the old way in which we were kind of learning and developing, but there are a myriad of ways in which we can do that. And so that personalization means everything to today's talent. And it's because we have a rapidly diversifying workforce, and these one-size-fits-all solutions just aren't going to cut it. So when we talk about what growing companies need to do to attract, retain, and develop and make sure that the young talent continue to be talented, the first thing that we need to do is to identify what they need and what they value. And so as we dive into that today, we are utilizing many different surveys and books out there that really helped us pull out and extrapolate some of those really compelling answers. And so, Heather, my question to you, what was near the top of the list when we were digging into the data of what Gen Z and millennials want today?
Yeah. So this answer might seem really obvious, but it's salary. So salary is important to everyone, but there are some different reasons why it's extremely important to our millennials and our Gen Zers. Salary is just really valued. Money is different today than it was back then. There is a difference in things that are rising, like the cost of, maybe education or the first home that we're buying. It's just a little bit different. And so it might seem obvious that salary comes up top, but what's very interesting to me is that what we've heard is these younger generations are talking out loud to their coworkers about their salary. So that leads us to our next poll question, which we're really excited to hear from you. Have you ever told a coworker how much you make? So your options are, yeah, I do it all the time. Yes, a few times. Once, and it came back to bite me, or no, of course not. So which one do you want to answer there in that poll question?
Interesting. Coming in, we've got 55% are saying no, of course not. 10% yes all the time. 35 yes a few times. So far, only one has come back where it said it came back to bite them. That's good.
It is good. It's interesting because if I was answering this poll, I would answer it C. And I didn't even realize how important it was to not talk about my salary. It was a group of us that all started, same role, same day. I kind of just assumed, which we know that's never great, right? But I just assumed we all started at the same salary. And my coworker asked me, I told her, and it turned out I made more than she did. She was very upset about it. So I was mortified. Have never talked about it since then. So yeah, I'm glad I'm an anomaly there.
That's right.
But, and so what's really interesting here, I think, is that the strongest answer was no, of course not. And so that's interesting when we talk about the shift, that people are talking about it. And so how do we prepare ourselves for that conversation? Because if for us, it's like, are you kidding me? I would never say this out loud.
Right.
So we're not kidding you. People are saying it out loud. So we have to shift just a little bit how we're thinking about that and prepare ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. And the stat here is that 81% of Gen Z and 75% of millennial workers believe that sharing pay information will lead to that equitable pay. And I think that that's so interesting. And so what have you seen, Heather, are some examples of ways that we can be more transparent about salaries in our hiring practices?
Yeah, so sometimes it's putting it right out there up front. We've seen some companies that are putting it right on their website. They're answering that question pretty openly and freely. That's not for everyone. I mean, sometimes then what can happen is that people will say, wait a minute, that starting salary is higher than what I had. I started 3 years ago. So there's a uniqueness in that. And so we would ask everyone to do what works best for your company. But that is one thing, to make it really transparent. And then second, to be prepared to talk about it. Okay, sure, maybe that was your salary 3 years ago, but here's what's happened since. And then really help people understand how they have grown and will continue to grow within the company. It's truly being prepared for that conversation when it comes up as well.
Right. Yeah. And it's so true. And I think that's something that we don't really provide the development opportunities for our managers to have those conversations. And it brings up this idea of being equitable. And you talked about it where, when you're posting perhaps salary bands or a specific salary, and it may be for a new position, and then somebody internally sees that maybe they fall outside of that band. And so how can we ensure that we're providing equitable pay for both not only our new hires, but our existing hires as well? And with that, providing that roadmap of saying, hey, within these salary bands, for example, this is what the skills are that you need to develop to move to that next level, and to continue to grow. And then the final thing that we can talk about is those non-tangibles. So one of the research that we came into as we dug into this was, it's not just about base salary, but it's what is the PTO benefits? What is the health benefits, 401k matching, sick time, parental leave, really that total compensation, and being transparent about what that is, and equitable for both, all members, new associates as well as existing. It's so important. So Heather, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it is really fascinating, the statistics on it. We have found that half of Gen Zers and millennials are sharing their salary information. And to your point, in the name of, they believe if they share it, it's going to lead to equitable pay. We have 81% of Gen Zers and 75% of millennials do believe that bringing that out into the open will lead to that. So that's pretty high percentage there.
Yeah, it's so enlightening. So what's another topic that we saw as we were diving into it, as far as what the Gen Z and millennials are wanting?
Yeah, so another thing that they're really valuing is flexibility. And I think one thing, again, an undeniable truth to that is that COVID presented some uniqueness to that. There were a lot of people who were sent home to work, and successfully. People who maybe prior to that did not believe they could be successful at home, right? And so the other thing with our Gen Zers is they were attending school from home. And that's an undeniable truth. So not everyone went home to work, but everyone went home for education. Am I right? Can I say that? Is that an undeniable truth? Okay.
Definitely.
So the other thing that happened is that they figured out, wow, my 8-hour school day, I figured out a way to get it done in 30 minutes. I mean, I don't know if this is true for everyone, but it was absolutely true in my house. The quicker they could get it done, the better. And I think it was really profound to see that. And so we can't deny that they've had a taste of it. And again, pretty successfully. I mean, that's probably a little debatable who had success with that and who didn't.
Yeah.
But we can't deny they're going to want this flexibility. And then also that there are a lot of ways that companies can think creatively about what that word flexible means. It doesn't mean the same thing for everyone. So if you can't be flexible with the hours or with whether or not they have to be, present in person, can you be flexible about other things? I know for us, we really pride ourselves on working at a bank. We have 47 different branches. These are customer facing. We have hours that we have to be open. But how can we allow our employees to do the things that they absolutely need to do, and even on a day's notice, like a funeral or something very important that comes up? That is extremely important to us, and we really want to make sure that we can provide the flexibility there. How can we be flexible about what they get to wear, about how their PTO is used? So I think it's important to think creatively, and it's not going to be a one size fits all, right, Jen?
Right. Oh, completely. Yeah. And I think that that's what we've seen in talking to one in my past experience, as well as when we're talking to enterprise clients, is one size fits all for personalization doesn't exist. And what works for one team, one job, one industry, one department may not work for another. And so many times we use that as a crutch to hold us back, to say, hey, we're not going to make anything personalized because we can't, or we're not going to make anything flexible because we can't make everything flexible. And that's really, honestly, a limiting belief, because there are ways in which we can get there and move the needle. And so how do we ask ourselves, what are ways that we can be more flexible with our associates for this specific team or job or department? So I know we've talked a little bit about those top two things, transparency and their salary and flexibility. So the area that I'm most passionate about, and I know that you are too, is the third topic, which it came about to be learning and development. And what we found when we really dove into what this millennial and Z audience wants as it relates to learning and development is that 76% of Gen Z see L&D as the key to success, and 87% see development opportunities as important to their job. And when we think about that, we know and we've heard Gen Z is called the Y generation. And why that is it's truly, they are driven by curiosity. As you've said, and we've talked about, they've grown up with the ability to ask questions and get answers from a diverse range of platforms, from people very, very quickly on the internet. And so when we know so much about learning and development, and we know how important it is to that younger talent, what we did at LearnIn was we actually did a study and a survey to discover what was it exactly that they wanted. And the results really reinforce this idea that learning is personalized and it leads to career growth. When we dove into the data, the top two things that we heard that they were looking for is, number one, in-house learning and development opportunities. And number two was personalized learning budgets that they can invest for their own development. And I loved hearing both of those things, because those are things that I resonate with and really yearn for as I'm looking for career opportunities and development in my own career trajectory. But Heather, what are a few ways that you've seen organizations can better support L&D to meet the needs of these two generations?
Yeah, I think it's just so important to have the conversation. Again, personalization is the key here, and we really find that in our younger generations, they are individual. And so if we ask them, what are some ways you enjoy learning, first of all, and then what kind of direction do you hope to go with your career growth? And we have some specific examples that I know are coming up a little bit later as well, Jen. So having the conversation and preparing your leaders in, again, a unique way to have it. It's not a one size fits all. I think it's so important to remember that as well.
Yeah, completely agree. Yeah, giving that opportunity. And our role in L&D is to, support and provide the environment in which those conversations can happen and make sure that they're happening as well. So as we move over we've really unpacked what are those values that they're looking for: transparent salaries, flexible work policies, and learning and development. What we want to move over to now is discussing those specific strategies and tips that you can implement in your company that can really appeal to these Gen Z and millennial workers. And so one of the strategies that we have is to make your hiring process quick and transparent. So we have to understand that our hiring odds with this talent war are tough hill to climb alone. But I was shocked to hear the stat that 92% of people who click apply on a job never complete their application. That just blew my mind that it was such a high number. But when I take a step back and look at to many of our hiring practices, it's not that much of a surprise. So Heather, what would you see are a few strategies that we can do to really upgrade our hiring processes, both short-term and to make them shorter and more transparent for this audience?
Yeah. So for some of us, it's looking at our job description. Do a little self-audit. I know that I've worked with companies in the past that haven't updated their job description in an embarrassing long time, right? And they'll admit that to us. And so how can we be, a little bit more detailed in that? Again, addressing that salary range if it makes sense, or even more importantly, like how can you grow? How can you get to that salary point that you desire, right? Mm-hmm. I think another easy way to do that is capturing us. Again, you have to remember this younger generation, they get their information so quickly. So videos, those can be really powerful. And when we talk about videos, we're even talking about 30 seconds or less to, and again, for the sake of really sharing our company's culture and beliefs, really telling the story about our brand and who we are. And then just making sure that our application is really quick to complete. The other thing we think about is the quality of candidate that's going to, go in there. I mean, I myself had such a great job when I found this opportunity at Citibank. If it wasn't 5 minutes or less, I may have panicked and been one of those 92%. But it was so quick and easy. I'm like, oh, I'm going to go for this. And I ended up getting just this amazing career because the application was honestly so simple.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so interesting. It makes total sense. So you mentioned video. And what was one technology that you've seen or heard of that might be something that they could leverage?
Yeah, so we have just an example here. It's called Video Ask. It's actually fairly inexpensive to use and very easy to use. So again, that's a great option, and to put that right on your website, like right on kind of that. Everyone's doing their websites uniquely, but yet still like having that content front and center, making sure people can see it well on their phones, right? All of those things that we're just making sure that we adjust for our newest generation and how they're receiving that information.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of the videos. And, some of the other things that kind of come to mind when we think about the tactics is, I think it's interesting, the stats of women versus men, and I don't know the exact numbers offhand, but that women are less likely to apply to the job unless they meet all of the qualifications or majority of the qualifications, where men at times will go for that. And I started seeing on LinkedIn some blurbs at the bottom of job descriptions where it was saying, if you do not meet all of these qualifications, we encourage you still to apply. And I think that that's something that is also, when we talk about transparency and support for this group and other generations as well, if giving them the nudge and the support that don't take your name out of the hat before you've even played the game, like throw it in. And then one of the other things that we had talked about was, how do we make the interview process more equitable in the process of identifying perhaps interview questions ahead of time, so that they can properly prepare. And that also gives you on the internal side an opportunity for you to standardize the process so that you're making sure you're asking the same questions for all of the applicants that are coming through, and then rating those in a non-biased way as much as possible. So I think that's really interesting. So interesting, as we move over to the second strategy here, the second strategy that we had to engage your young employees is mentorship programs. And I have been really privileged throughout my career to have both formal mentors and informal mentors support my development, and both personally and professionally, honestly. And I think that they are so important for existing generations that are, in the workforce, as well as the Gen Zers who are going to be, coming into the fold as well. What have you seen, or what mentorship programs, Heather, have you experienced that have been really great for organizations in supporting development?
Yeah. So what's exciting about mentorship programs is there's a lot of different ways that you can launch those programs, or ways that you can kind of format that. For us at the bank, it's fairly new. We've only had it for about 3 years. We always take kind of a controllable group through it every year. But the benefits that we've seen from it are, it's like a dream it's everything you want for a company. It's the cross training. It's the being able to settle into the culture. It's being able to have a friend. For us, it's bridging our corporate to our retail. I mean, honestly, like, all the things that you want to happen within an organization is happening through this mentorship program. It has really been amazing. I couldn't recommend it more. But what's so fascinating about that is our younger people are hungry for this. They want this knowledge. We have to remember too, again, an undeniable truth for them is that some of them feel like they've sort of missed a couple of years of growing and developing. And so they're even more hungry right now for that fast track. How can they regain those 2 years that they kind of lost? So I think a mentorship program is an excellent way to do all of those things.
Yeah, that is so true. So true. One of the concepts that I am really intrigued by as it relates to mentorship is this concept of flash mentorship. And it's really moving beyond, the program that you described is rigorous. You're selected. It's a formal program of meeting times, et cetera. And the concept of flash mentorship is really meant to be a one and done touch point with a subject matter expert, really in the flow of work. And when we started to unpack this concept, it really started to resonate as to why this concept would work for the Gen Z and millennial audiences. And when we think about social media, TikTok, Instagram, we are bombarded in a positive way, of course, but with influencers, what to buy, where to shop, how to dress, things along those lines. And so we're essentially getting flash mentorship constantly in our social, in our personal lives, and on our social feeds. And so how can we borrow that experience that they're already having in their personal lives and leverage it in our corporate talent development programs? And so when we provide these opportunities for guided flash mentorship, where you bring in a subject matter expert that's relevant to a specific skill or project that's happening, and you give them feedback and they get that coaching really in that moment of need, it can really bridge the gap. And it ties back to what we talked about with personalization, and that it's not either or, it's and. How do we have a guided, robust mentorship program that perhaps even leads to sponsorship, as well as sprinkled in flash mentorship opportunities that may be specific to those skills and business needs to really support them in a variety of ways going forward? So when we talk about the third and final strategy that we want to double click on today is how to really focus on investing in learning and development. And so this is what we talked about earlier, but we want to go a little bit deeper here. And as we dove into the research, we saw that 83% of Gen Zs want to learn new skills or perform better in their current role. And so when we think about a strategy that's going to help you both hire and retain that younger workforce, it is at the core investing in learning and development. And so for years, what we've known is that the statistics have shown this correlation between retention and investing in L&D. But what is specific about these two generations and very unique is that L&D not only helps with retention, but it's also a draw for hiring those millennial and Gen Z workers. And so for these generations, unlike previous ones, they are willing to quit if a company does not offer career growth. And that is a big issue when we're talking about attrition and really fighting this war on talent. And in fact, as we show on this slide, lack of career development has actually dethroned salary as the number one reason why employees are quitting their job. And, it's interesting on the Buzz LinkedIn, you're hearing a lot about quiet quitting. And I really wonder if there isn't actually something to do with this idea of lack of proper learning and development support within our organizations that's kind of propelling this concept forward. So anyhow, this kind of leads us to the final topic, which is ways to keep our top talent, talented. And so really the beauty with learning and development is that not only does it help you hire and retain that young talent, but it also helps them keep them talented. And so we're in the midst of a very growing skills gap. And in order to keep our talent up to date and fresh, we are going to need those constant upskilling, reskilling, and development programs to really support them in their roles of the jobs that are needed for today and the future. And so, Heather, as you were really unpacking this, what were some of the ways that you saw it was best to help create and make experiences to develop that young talent and keep them talented?
Yeah. So again, it's having this unique conversation and recognizing that career growth might not look like a ladder, but yet a jungle gym or a rock climbing wall, something that, a concept that was introduced to us in the book, Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go. And it was really fascinating to think that there are a lot of different ways, personal, individual, that we want to grow in our career. So it's asking the right questions to make sure that we are helping them get there. It might not be our path. I know, Jen, you and I even talked about, when we talked about salary, we're like, wow, were you willing to take a pay cut? Mm-hmm. And both you and I said, yep, that's like falling off the ladder, I think. I'm not sure. I don't know. But it's going to look different, right? And so we just want to make sure that we're recognizing that. It's also considering that we have rock stars and we have superstars. Again, a concept that was introduced to me and us at the bank by Kim Scott, author of Radical Candor. And right. It's so crucial that we have both within our company. So a rock star are those people that are in their role. They're so good at it. They are so happy doing it, and they could stay there until retirement. I mean, we have those people and we need those people. We also have those superstars that are looking for that growth, looking for maybe something different. They want to learn something new. It takes both, right?
Right.
So just recognizing that we have both and we want to honor both. Sometimes when you have that conversation, like, how do we climb the jungle gym or the rock climbing wall or the ladder with our rock stars? And they're like, they don't love that conversation. They're like, what do you mean? I'm happy here. So we really have to honor that and be mindful. Right. And then it's so important always, right, to tie our personal goals, values, and strengths, and make sure that they are, or that we're pointing out, if it's not obvious, how it might tie to our company goals, values, and strengths, and future direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You hit the nail on the head. I think it's so interesting. So going back to your comment about the salaries, when I tell people that I've throughout my career intentionally taken pay salary cuts to move to opportunities, it was because I was looking for specific development, specific exposure to projects. And it was the type of work that really resonated most with me. And I think it kind of pairs back to this, how are we redefining success? And what success means to me in this chapter of my life may mean differently what was success 10 years ago for me, and what is success for you today. And so that is that interwoven thread that we're talking about of personalization, and that it's not a crock pot. It's not a set and forget it, that this is what my criteria are and I'm going to always stick to it. And it's not a one size fits all. And even when I think about my career, I love the analogy of the jungle gym instead of a ladder, because when I think about my role, at first I thought it was very much linear, but I have, taken on so many different types of projects and roles. In some cases, my title may have actually remained the same, but the type of work and the skills that I was building day in and day out continue to evolve. And I think that as we provide those opportunities for those stretch assignments and stretch projects, and really, as you mentioned, have those conversations with our talent and foster that, it's key. It's so important. So one thing as we talk about the next strategy is providing those personalized learning opportunities. And so what do you suggest we do to create more personalized learning opportunities for our audience?
Yeah, so one thing we can do is just ask them how they like to learn. Some people love books. They can get a lot out of books. So then we buy them books and we hand them books. However, I think, what about the audible version of it? If we have a commute, or it's better to listen while we're doing the dishes, it honestly can work differently for different people for different reasons. So that's why we need to ask. Giving them options, like maybe they prefer this group learning, the short videos like we talked about before. We've really challenged ourselves to how can we get content out there, like a new concept in 2 minutes or less? How can we give them just this bite-sized nugget, right? Very, very manageable, memorable, so that they can learn it really quickly and then try it and then talk about it. What worked, what didn't. So the idea share has been really a popular thing for us as well with those group conversations. And then, sometimes we can give people a whole big library. Here you go, whatever works for you. But often people aren't quite sure even what they might need. So if we can really listen to them, have a great conversation, and then build them a track, much more effective. It's going to feel personalized for them, right? And then we'll know, like, wow, if you want to get here, that may require this competency. Let me build a track for you.
Yeah. I think that's so important. And it really lends itself to kind of this push and pull strategy of how do you have things where they can pull whatever they need at the time in which they need it, whether it's, I'm driving and so I want to listen to something, or I'm wanting to read and get a little bit more knowledge on a topic. So making sure that those are available and that personalized experience for the talent, as well as, pushing these more formal learning experiences that, again, do not have to be relegated to a single modality of instructor-led course or a webinar or a boot camp or what have you, but how are we creating these multi-touch learning experiences and academies where they really can go to focus on that deep skill building. So yes, you've identified you're wanting to develop skills in these ways, and you can pull this content down when you want it. And then also we're going to support you with this very hyper targeted, deep learning experience where you can be in a cohort, learning with your peers, and really focus on building those skills so that you can apply those back on the job as well. Yeah, so when we think about the final strategy to really dive into, one of the ways that we think about keeping this young talent talented is this idea of prepaid learning stipends. And so instead of those, or in addition to those large library content, how do we give our young talent those personalized tracks for career development? And then how do we do that at scale? And so at LearnIn, what we provide is, and other organizations do as well, is really this opportunity to leverage a learning stipend tool that can help you do just that. And with learning stipends, it allows employees to kind of pick the course or boot camp that supports their unique career goals and aspirations, while also supporting the skill development priorities of the organization. And that's a win-win for both parties. That's the key to making sure we are retaining and developing our talent. And when we think about these learning stipends or learning budgets, we really start to think about it being prepaid, particularly for this Gen Z and millennial audience. And when we go to the next slide here, the really key things that we're talking about is why this resonates most for them is that Gen Z and millennial workers make up 75% of the workforce population by 2030. So that is a large majority that are going to be this audience. And some of the key things that matter most to them is making sure that it's valuable. So when we think about learning stipends, the majority of young workers value and demand learning and development opportunities. And so that's a check right there. What we also know is that half of young workers today are living paycheck to paycheck. They can't afford to foot the bill to prepay for a program themselves. And so how do we provide and make it more affordable for them so that the organization will cover the cost of the program for them to take the course or class that aligns with their business goals as well as the development goals? It also ties back to being more inclusive. And so by being prepaid, it offers this equal upskilling opportunities for those most racially and ethically diverse working generations. I can tell you firsthand, I've worked for organizations in the past where even within the same department, the learning budgets that were there were dependent on this specific manager and what they were willing to support. And that just did not provide a very inclusive, equitable way in which to support your learners. And so I think that's an important thing that we want to make sure that organizations are considering. And the final piece that they're looking for is making that personalized. So when you are thinking about personalized learning budgets and specifically prepaid learning stipends, it allows those talent and your associates to pick those courses and classes that are most relevant to them and really support their unique career goals. So what I'd love to hear from you, Heather, is what additional ads do you have related to learning stipends or learning budgets that you think is really important to share?
Yeah, I think it's important to just be transparent up front, to communicate it throughout. And then even maybe more importantly is when you do invest in someone to go to a conference or take on some additional development, how can they bring it back? How can they bring it back to the team, bring it back to you so that the next time they ask, like, hey, can you invest in me again? You'll know, the value of that because everyone followed up and communicated that after the fact.
Yeah, I love that. Like lunch and learns, pay it forward. That's great. So as we kind of wrap up here, really the overarching message that we took from this research was that personalization piece. And at the end of the day, one size doesn't fit all. And we need to, as employers, as leaders, to try to create those systems and leverage technologies that can make these experiences more personalized. These generations are not expecting perfection, but they are expecting progress. And so how can we start to invest in them more intentionally, dedicating our time and energy to really create solutions that are more personalized and can also scale? And we've got to do so intentionally. And throwing up our hands and saying, well, we can't do it all, so we're not going to do any of it. That's not going to cut it because at the end of the day, it is possible. And small changes can have a great impact. And before we move to the Q&A, we do want to encourage you to identify one area, just one area that we talked about today that you're going to focus on for your organization to make a more personalized learning experience for your current talent as well as the Gen Zs and millennials that'll continue to move into the workforce, whether it's about salary transparency, flexibility, hiring practice, mentorship, and of course, learning and development. So with that, I'll pass it to Brenda to open up the Q&A.
Perfect. Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Heather, for that great presentation. And I want to start off the Q&A here. We have a lot of great questions from our audience here, so let's just dive right in. So for the first question here, we have from Guillermo R. His question is, should we support employee learning during business hours?
Yeah, do you want to take that one, or do you want me to?
I think we both nodded yes at the same time. So yes,
Yeah.
That does get tricky. It gets tricky for us to absolutely. We should honor everyone and do our best to fit it within our work time.
Yeah, I would agree. And one thing that we did at my prior organization was we did not have hourly staff. So I know it does get more complicated when you have hourly versus salary, but we were still calculating our hourly rates for our teams. And when we were doing that and scoping projects, we allocated anywhere from 3 to 5% of time for formal learning and development. That did not include those experiences that were very job and role specific that tied back to a project. And so I think that's where, when you think about when you're creating learning experiences that are tied to actual work projects that you're doing, you then get a value add there that's kind of built in and double time bonus points. So not only is your talent being developed, but you're also getting new thought leadership and new work done on critical projects for your organization.
Perfect. Yes, that's a great way to balance the time for everyone there. So next question that we have is from Smoliski, and their question is, do you suggest professional and development funds for all employees as an annual stipend? Sorry.
Sure. Heather, do you want to share your recommendation, and I can share ours as well?
So maybe what would be, instead of like individual for everyone, maybe by teams or by department, maybe there's a pool, because everyone's going to be climbing their jungle gym or ladder uniquely. So a pool, I think, amongst shared individuals might be a good way to think about.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. And one thing that we see as we're working with a variety of different clients is, no surprise, one size doesn't fit all. So one strategy that works for one organization and even department doesn't necessarily work for the other. But ways in which we do recommend that you find ways to allocate budget for personalized learning, one-to-one, cohort learning, one-to-few, and then also broader range projects that are one-to-many. And the way that you can work to invest that is, if we are investing our L&D dollars into problems that we're needing to solve for the business, you will see an ROI on that, and it will be positive. And so when you're doing that, it doesn't feel like it's a cost liability. It's actually a projector that can add growth to your team and to your development. And it can also stave off where, particularly when we talk about these deep skill building and the skills shortage that we're going to have in the coming years, now is the time to start investing and building our bench strength for the development that we need for tomorrow. And so it'll ultimately become a cost liability to us if we haven't invested in our people and learning and development along the way.
Perfect. Thank you. And then another great question we have from one of our attendees here is Nicholas. His question is, shouldn't L&D be inclusive in the total compensation item?
I would say yes. And Heather, I love your build on this, but completely. And honestly, when I came to Learn In, one of the compensation elements was that I get a personalized learning budget for my own learning to use for subscriptions, conferences, courses, and classes. And I viewed that as a component of my total compensation. And I think that that's a very valid benefit. And when you list it as such, you're key to really attract those that are looking for those features. Heather, what would you have to add on to that?
Yeah, same. Calling out some of those individual investments that we make towards the salary helps for that personalization and helps with that conversation, like we talked about at the front end of our webinar.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Thank you both. Here's a great question from Guillermo, more towards the hiring strategy here. So as HR, do you recommend providing salary comparison data when requested by employees?
Heather, do you want to take that one first?
Well, so there's websites that will give you that comparison as well. Again, I think what we've talked about a lot, like what works over here may not work over there. So that would be up to the organization as well. But per kind of that comment I made about they'll probably find the information somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I would agree with you. So +1 to everything that you said. And I think a few other adds. My personal preference, and if it were my decision to make, I would say that I would recommend an organization create their own methodology and how they're establishing salary criteria and bands, and provide that justification back to the team, which may or may not include industry standards or market standards and things along those lines. In fact, it likely would. But I think when we present it in a way in which it's very personalized for this is the role that we have, the skills that we have, and the market that we are working in, and the industry that we're working in, it then provides this view where you're more educating them on how the career progression and then salary and compensation works for your organization, because it's very unique to you, versus saying, hey, this is what this company over here does, and so we're just going to match it.
Perfect, thank you. And we have time for one more question here from Nicholas B. Their question is, how do you see the acceptable current job turnover rate of less than 5 years for many or most new hires? What are your thoughts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Heather, do you want to take that one first and I'll add in?
Is this the Great Resignation? Is this what we're talking about? Yeah, so I'm so curious, Jen, what you have seen, like in the name of the Great Resignation. I think for us, the turnover we haven't seen a huge change. Now, you have to remember, I live and work in North Dakota and Minnesota. So it could be a little different for us as well. But I'm so curious, Jen, what you are seeing.
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned the Great Resignation. I personally love the term Great Realignment or Great Awakening. And I think to get back to the specific question, we are seeing a shift, and there were people who the pandemic was a pressure pot, of it really pushing all of us to realign on what's important, what matters, how are we going to spend our time, how are we contributing in the world, and how do we want to show up? And I think that that's propelled us forward and likely contributes. And so when we take a more transparent approach into how we're supporting and providing learning and development and career growth opportunities for our teams, that I think is really important. And knowing that gone are likely the days that someone's going to stay in an organization for decades. We're probably past that.
Perfect. Thank you both. So Jen, I'll let you, take over here for this final slide.
Sure. Yes. So thank you again, Heather. It was an absolute delight to hear all of the thought leadership that you had to share with everyone in the audience today. Really appreciate your time. And Brenda, appreciate you giving us the opportunity to share this with the team. We do have a few QR codes here where you can learn more about LearnIn, as well as book a demo for our platform. So with that, Brenda, I'll pass it to you for final closing.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jen. And yes, I mean, I just want to take the time to thank you and Heather again for being here and sharing your expertise with us and our audience today. So thank you again to LearnIn for sponsoring today's webinar. This webinar was recorded, so a link will be emailed to all of the attendees today. So just keep an eye on your inbox for that so you can rewatch it and take more notes. Lots of great content in here. So yeah, thank you. With that, thank you all again once more for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.